Welcome back to our Dan Education series. Today we're going to be talking about the aging diver. Diving is becoming a sport for older connoisseurs. Nowadays there are more divers at a higher age than there ever were, and they are eager to savor their time as intensely as possible, with well-chosen dive locations which often lead them to the tropics or subtropics for long periods of time. There are also more divers that not only go on dive safaris, but look at other forms of enjoyment and want to dive safely and more cautiously because they're usually more experienced. They are also more willing to act responsibly and accept the restrictions regarding their diving activities in the case of physical limitations. Age-related physical limitations may include chronic diseases, which often lead to the use of chronic medication, and the medication must be compatible with diving. This also applies to medical aids and medical devices such as pacemakers. Obviously hearing aids can't go underwater, etc., etc. So the advice of a diving doctor is required. And while examining the fitness of divers should always be done in relation to the overall picture, it's particularly important to focus a diving medical according to the age of the diver being examined. And this includes an understanding of a possible reduced level of physical fitness, reduced strength and endurance, altered lung function, increased reaction times, reduced cold resistance, and some additional risks. For instance, immersion itself can trigger certain physical reactions, and they may have unfavorable effects, especially on older divers. There's a fluid shift into the body core. There's a constriction of blood vessels of the skin. There may be an increase in urine excretion, and those inevitable consequences of immersion may affect those of higher age than they would younger individuals. And that's why it is important that dehydration should be prevented as far as possible. In other words, avoiding thick blood. And to do that, one should maintain adequate hydration, as that limits the effects, particularly on the cardiovascular system. Being immersed forces the heart to pump about 30% more than it would in a non-immersed environment. And there's greater resistance in the peripheral blood vessels, which may increase blood pressure and even produce acute hypertension. So if there are circulatory disorders of the heart, this may be relevant. It can trigger cardiac arrhythmias, in other words, the heart beating non-regularly. It can precipitate acute breathlessness. Pre-existing heart disease may be exacerbated, or underlying heart disease may be suddenly discovered. There are risks of the lungs being challenged by the increasing depth and the density of the breathing gas as the dive goes deeper. And all of these restrictions may manifest in restrictions on what the organs or the reserve of the organs are able to tolerate. Even in experienced divers, usually less than 5% of body energy will go to finning. And this may be a limiting factor in terms of breathing mechanics. And it can quickly get out of hand with overexertion. So, special attention should be given during the medical examination, during the checkup of older divers, and should be explained to the diver. Sometimes additional diagnostic tests may be necessary. Physical exercise capacity and endurance may need to be checked. The aim is to be able to provide profound advice under which conditions a diver with age related limitations can still dive safely. So let's look briefly at some of the risks of the cardiovascular system. This is the type of advice that would be given to a diver as they advance in age. Expand your margin of safety. In other words, don't dive too deep or too long. Choose the shorter or shallower dives. Respect safety stops and use the ascent rates that are slower. Reduce the number of repetitive dives. Consider moving to nitrox instead of breathing air as the compressed breathing gas. Maintain performance tolerance. Do suitable age-adapted sports with activities that focus on endurance and muscle strength so that these may be transferred to the diving environment. Avoid dehydration. A tip, just before diving, make sure that there's enough saliva, because good salivation, in other words, good production of saliva, is an indication of good fluid balance. And the same is true of the color of urine. Unless one has had a lot of coffee or other diuretics, urine should be clear and basically look like water. The yellower and the more concentrated it is, the greater the state of dehydration. Reduce the burden of equipment that's carried. Don't challenge your physical limits intentionally to the very limit. Avoid stressful dives and dive in a relaxed fashion. Also avoid jumping into the water. Slide into the water to minimize the acute effects of immersion. Make sure that you optimize cold protection. And this should be designed to avoid even slight chill. Here's some answers to some frequently asked questions by older divers. At what age should I reduce diving? Well, it's a biological issue. In other words, biological age that counts, not chronological age. In other words, an individual at 40 may already have some restrictions that someone might expect at 70. And therefore, it's important to assess the individual as an individual. It's not only about age, it's about physiological reserve. And the diving fitness assessment should be focused on this. In the older diver, which means above 55 by the current definition, the examination is particularly important and focuses on cardiorespiratory reserve. When should I stop going diving? Well, again, it's really when your body tells you to. The actual age as a number is not the decision. When it comes to health, the body sends its own signals that diving becomes burdensome or staying underwater starts becoming unpleasant, and then the time has come to reconsider. Should I dive more conservatively? Is another question. Well, yes, of course. That's strongly encouraged. There are a number of recommendations for safe diving, and these should be considered by older divers. Are older divers more susceptible to decompression illness? Not necessarily. However, they can significantly reduce the risk of decompression illness by proper hydration before diving and accounting for the restrictions or the reserve changes in breathing and exchange of gases. They can ascend more slowly and make use of safety stops. Is there a greater risk of cardiovascular problems? Well, unfortunately, yes. The immersion effects cannot be denied. In otherwise still compensated cardiovascular diseases, the diving immersion may become the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back, especially unexpected events that lead to sudden physical and mental stress. Just as a personal note, I'm a diving instructor myself, and I taught my father to dive at age 69. And one of the comments that the skippers made and seeing him on the boat was, "Why did you wait so long? I'm happy to say that my father enjoyed his dive, did extremely well, and has worn the badge of his Open Water 1 dive certification with great pride. We at Dan Southern Africa encourage you to participate in the understanding and taking the responsibility of biological age, which is far more important than chronological age. And the campaign towards the elder diver focuses on just that. So remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and the other social media platforms, and of course continue supporting Dan and subscribing to this channel. Until next time, safe diving.